Tomorrow, the Supreme Court is expected to settle the debate over former President Donald Trump's claims that a president is immune from prosecution. Their decision will determine the extent presidential immunity can shield a former executive from conduct that happened during their time in office. Trump's legal team has asked for absolute immunity for official acts. They also say it applies after leaving office, arguing the protections cover Trump's efforts to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power after losing the 2020 election. Well, joining me this morning to talk about this and more is Robert Shapiro, a constitutional law expert and professor of political philosophy and philosophy of law. Rob, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining me today.
Good to see you, Paul.
So
Good to see you.
Let me start with the immunity case. We'll get it tomorrow, but I'm going to start with something. It's an uncomfortable and unfortunate question. There's a lot of buzz that the Supreme Court has been very political in how they handled this, holding off whether they would take it, then taking it and putting it at the end of the argument term, and then the decision coming out on the very last day. The Supreme Court's not supposed to be political.
Well, there are some debates about that, but I think that this is probably more the result of having to come up with what is going to be a pretty difficult standard to articulate. I mean, there are the advocates for no immunity. There are the advocates for full immunity. I think the court probably is going to come down someplace in between, and articulating where exactly that standard is, where that line is drawn, I think is a difficult thing. And I think that they're probably struggling with it. And there are probably multiple decisions, concurrences and dissents that are going to come out with this decision. So I would attribute it more to the fact of the processes of the Supreme Court than to any kind of sort of political idea that's motivating this.
So my crystal ball would say, I think what they're going to do is they're going to say there isn't total immunity, but it depends. And then they will send it back to the district court for Judge Tanya Chutkan to decide which things Trump did or is accused of doing fall within the scope of his duties and which don't. And then others will argue that's political too. Do you agree with that possible outcome of this case, and would that be political?
Well, in a sense, I do. I think that they will articulate some kind of standard. I think that they're going to have to say what is subject to immunity and what is not in a general way. And then I do agree with you that I think they'll send it back for the trial court to kind of decide which things fall on which side of the line. And that's going to be a lengthy process, by the way. I don't think that's going to happen quickly. The one sure outcome of this is going to be further delay in that particular case, and possibly the records case as well, although that one's a harder one to justify that kind of a delay in.
Right, and exactly. That's where Judge Aileen Cannon has been putting off and having
Correct.
hearings and hearings. Let me also ask you about the Fisher case that came down on Friday, and that's the January 6th case, in which the court determined that the statute that was being used to prosecute January 6 offenders, a statute that basically tries to prevent people from interfering with the congressional proceeding, with documents, with evidence, the court said, you know, that doesn't really apply to January 6. It came out of the Enron situation, but misapplied here. What is your take?
Well, that's right. One of the things that you see in the Supreme Court is them trying to now construe statutes in a narrow fashion. We saw that also in the bribery decision that came out of Indiana, which may have an impact on the prosecutions that are going on in Illinois. They're trying to take a very narrow view of these statutes. Again, you could label it as political, but I think in this instance, they're trying to read the statutes and try to understand exactly what Congress's intent was and what they actually set down in the law. And it was motivated primarily by that. Now, a lot of the prosecutors have been well aware that this outcome might arise, and therefore they've been structuring these cases in a way in which this will have less of an impact than some people think.
By the way,
I think.
Sorry, let me add, in the Snyder case, which you just mentioned, which basically in the court said, my word's not theirs, it's fine to give a gratuity after you steer some business some politician's way. Don't take a bribe, but it's okay to thank them afterwards. A lot of people think that's a little crazy. But that being said, any thought on what the impact of that will be on the Mike Madigan case, which is just down the way a little bit? And of course, the ComEd 4, they're waiting sentencing.
That's right. I mean, but you notice a continuing pattern here of kind of limiting the impact of these laws.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly how that fits fits within the way in which the court has been going, except that it sort of favors their notion of textualism, where you read very carefully and narrowly the language of a particular statute or, for that matter, constitutional grant. So it's kind of what the court is doing. And they are a little worried, I think, that prosecutors overreach a little bit with some of these statutes, trying to wrap in conduct that probably wasn't what Congress had in mind. And so, therefore, I think they're limiting the impact of these.
Yeah, it's amazing to see these cases, how many things actually impact people's lives and people here at home as we're watching those. Professor Rob Shapiro, it's always good to see you. Thanks. There are more cases to come down, but I'm going to try and have you back real soon, and we'll talk about some other stuff.
A lot more cases coming, yeah.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thanks.
All right. One more break and a look at the week ahead when we come back.